The Danube shimmers in the August dawn. Across the shallow waters of the Nebel stream, 56,000 French and Bavarian soldiers occupy an unassailable position. Their artillery commands every approach. Their veteran infantry fills the fortified village of Blenheim like a fortress. Their cavalry, the finest in Europe, waits on higher ground. It is the 13th of August, 1704. On the opposite bank, John Churchill, England's Captain General, newly created Duke of Marlborough, studies the enemy through his telescope. Every principle of 18th century warfare screams at him to withdraw. The French position is perfect. Marshal Tallard has done everything correctly. The terrain favors defense. The numbers favor France. Louis XIV's armies have not lost a major battle in 60 years. To attack is madness. To retreat is to abandon Vienna to French conquest, to watch the Grand Alliance crumble, to concede Europe to Bourbon domination for generations. Marlborough closes his telescope. He will attack. What follows in the next 9 hours will be called, by military historians 3 centuries hence, a perfect battle, a masterpiece of tactical execution, strategic deception, and operational audacity that saved Europe from French hegemony. The casualties will be catastrophic. The stakes could not be higher. The outcome will redraw the map of European power. Yet, today, ask a dozen educated Britons to name Marlborough's greatest victory, and most will draw a blank. Mention Blenheim, and they'll think of a palace, not a battle. The first Duke of Marlborough, who never lost an engagement, who besieged no fortress he did not take, who revolutionized the art of war through combined arms coordination and strategic mobility. This military genius has been eclipsed by Wellington, overshadowed by Nelson, forgotten by a nation that reveres its heroes. This is the story of why. This is the story of Blenheim. This is the story of the most perfect battle ever fought that no one remembers. John Churchill was born on the 26th of May, 1650, into a world convulsed by civil war. His family minor Devonshire gentry had chosen the royalist side and paid dearly for it. His father, Sir Winston Churchill, emerged from the Commonwealth period impoverished, his estates diminished, his prospects dim. For young John, born into reduced circumstances at Ash House near Axminster, advancement would require not inheritance, but ability. At 12 years of age, the boy was sent to London as a page to James, Duke of York, the future King James II. It was an opportunity seized through family connections, a foothold in the Stuart court that would prove both blessing and curse. The Duke's household offered education, polish, and proximity to power. Young Churchill possessed the essential qualities for court life. He was remarkably handsome, exceptionally intelligent, and possessed natural charm that opened doors his birth could not. But John Churchill did not intend to remain a courtier. In 1667, aged 17, he received his first military commission as an ensign in the King's Own Company of the First Guards. It was a junior posting, but it was a beginning. The peacetime army of Charles II offered limited prospects for glory, yet Churchill threw himself into the profession of arms with characteristic intensity. He studied fortification, learned languages, observed the continental military systems that were transforming warfare. When opportunity came, he would be ready. The opportunity arrived in 1672 when England allied with France against the Dutch Republic. Churchill, now 22, crossed to France and served under the greatest commander of the age, the Vicomte de Turenne. Here, in the brutal campaigns of the Franco-Dutch War, Churchill received his true military education. He watched Turenne maneuver armies with surgical precision, observed how to fix an enemy's attention whilst delivering the decisive blow elsewhere, learned that warfare was as much about logistics and intelligence as courage and firepower. At the Siege of Nijmegen, Churchill distinguished himself sufficiently that Louis XIV himself commended the young English officer. It was heady recognition, but Churchill remained clear-eyed. He was learning the French system from within its strengths and, crucially, its weaknesses. That knowledge would prove invaluable 3 decades hence. Returning to England, Churchill rose steadily through patronage and merit combined. He married Sarah Jennings, a lady-in-waiting to Princess Anne, in 1678, a love match that would prove both his greatest support and, eventually, his political undoing. Sarah was brilliant, forceful, and utterly devoted to Anne. Through this connection, Churchill gained influence with the Stuart succession, but also dangerous proximity to court intrigue. The crisis came in 1685, when his patron, the Duke of York, inherited the throne as James II. Churchill, now a brigadier general, commanded the royal forces that crushed the Duke of Monmouth's Protestant rebellion at Sedgemoor. It was a competent performance, loyally delivered. Yet Churchill, a committed Protestant, watched with growing alarm as James II attempted to re-Catholicize England. When William of Orange invaded in 1688, Churchill made the most consequential decision of his political life. He defected to William, bringing crucial officers with him. James II fled. The Glorious Revolution succeeded, and John Churchill earned a reputation as a turncoat that would haunt him for decades. But William III recognized Churchill's military talent. In 1689, commanding English troops in the Low Countries, Churchill won praise from Prince Waldeck for his performance at the Battle of Walcourt. Despite his youth, Waldeck reported, he displayed greater military knowledge than do most generals. The following year, Churchill received his first independent command, an amphibious operation against Jacobite forces in Ireland. In swift succession, he captured Cork and Kinsale, demonstrating the combined operations capability that would become his signature. Yet political intrigue derailed his ascent. Accused probably falsely of conspiring with the exiled James II, Churchill was briefly imprisoned in the Tower of London in 1692. He was exonerated, but the episode confirmed William's distrust. For the next decade, England's most talented general sat largely idle whilst continental warfare raged. It was a wilderness period, but not a wasted one. Churchill studied the War of the League of Augsburg from afar, analyzing why William's campaigns achieved so little despite enormous expenditure. He concluded that the prevailing strategy, ponderous siege warfare, cautious maneuvering, avoidance of decisive battle had reached a dead end. Modern armies, properly coordinated, could move faster and strike harder than the defensive-minded French expected. Warfare was becoming mobile again. The commander who grasped this would revolutionize European conflict. When Queen Anne ascended the throne in 1702, everything changed. Sarah Churchill, Anne's intimate friend since childhood, became the most powerful woman at court. John Churchill was appointed Captain General of English forces and Master General of the Ordnance, created Earl of Marlborough, then Duke. He was given command of the Allied armies in the War of the Spanish Succession, a conflict triggered by the death of Charles II of Spain and Louis XIV's attempt to place his grandson on the Spanish throne, thus threatening to unite France and Spain under Bourbon rule. At 52 years of age, John Churchill finally possessed the authority to implement his vision of warfare. He had studied under Turenne, observed the French system's strengths and rigidities. He experienced the frustrations of cautious coalition warfare under William III. He understood logistics, intelligence, combined arms, the psychology of subordinates, and the art of strategic deception. The French had enjoyed 60 years of military dominance. They controlled the strongest fortress system in Europe. Their armies were large, well-equipped, and superbly drilled. Marshal Tallard, the Duc de Villeroy, Marshal Boufflers. These were experienced commanders who had never known defeat. Louis XIV believed his position unassailable. He had not reckoned with Marlborough. In the spring of 1704, the strategic situation was desperate. A Franco-Bavarian army threatened Vienna. If the Habsburg capital fell, the Grand Alliance would collapse. Austria would sue for peace. Louis XIV would dominate Europe. Everything England had fought for since 1688 would be lost. The Allied War Council in The Hague debated endlessly. The Dutch field deputies, civilian officials who controlled Dutch forces, favored defensive operations in the Low Countries. Moving to Bavaria would leave the Netherlands vulnerable. It was too risky, too distant, too logistically complex. Marlborough disagreed. He saw clearly what others could not. The decisive theater was not Flanders, but southern Germany. Save Vienna, and the alliance survived. Lose Vienna, and French hegemony was assured. In May, he acted, telling the Dutch he intended to campaign on the Moselle. Marlborough marched his army south from the Netherlands. Only his closest confidants, Prince Eugene of Savoy, the Dutch Grand Pensionary Heinsius, and his trusted quartermaster William Cadogan, knew the true destination. The march itself was a masterpiece of deception and logistics. Marlborough had arranged supplies at every stage. His troops marched swiftly but comfortably, arriving at each camp to find provisions and fresh boots waiting. He built pontoon bridges openly on the Moselle to convince French intelligence he was headed there, whilst his real objective lay 250 miles further south. By the time French commanders realized Marlborough's actual destination, he was already on the Danube. On the 2nd of July, Marlborough stormed the fortress at the Schellenberg, outside Donauwörth. It was a brutal, costly assault. The Allies suffered some 5,000 casualties, but it secured a crossing over the Danube and positioned Marlborough to interdict Franco-Bavarian communications. More importantly, it demonstrated to his troops that he would fight decisively, not waste their lives in endless sieges. Marshal Tallard marched to reinforce the Elector of Bavaria. On the 11th of August, the combined Franco-Bavarian army, 56,000 strong with 90 guns, took up position near the village of Blenheim on the Danube's north bank. The English corrupted the name to Blenheim, and history recorded it thus. Prince Eugene joined Marlborough with Austrian and Imperial forces, bringing Allied strength to 52,000 with 66 guns. The armies faced each other across the marshy valley of the Nebel stream. Tallard's position appeared impregnable. His left wing anchored on the village of Lutzingen, strongly fortified. His center straddled the village of Oberglau. His right wing packed 27 battalions into Blenheim itself, turning it into a fortress. Artillery covered every approach. The Nebel stream, shallow but marshy, presented an obstacle that would disorder any attacking force. Behind this line, on higher ground, Tallard positioned his cavalry reserve. By every principle of early 18th century warfare, Tallard had done everything correctly. An attacker would have to advance across open ground under artillery fire, cross the Nebel under musket fire, then assault prepared. Positions uphill. It should have been impossible. At dawn, on the 13th of August, Marlborough surveyed the enemy position one final time. His staff officers shifted uneasily. The Duke of Württemberg voiced what others thought. "I know them well. That army will not be easy to beat." Marlborough's reply was characteristically understated. "I know they boast, but I hope to have the honor of beating them before nightfall." The Allied army deployed in the early morning mist. Marlborough commanded the left and center. Prince Eugene commanded the right. The plan was precise. Eugene would attack Lutzingen and Oberglau to fix French attention and prevent reinforcements moving south. Simultaneously, Lord Cutts, a scarred veteran known as the Salamander for walking unscathed through fire, would assault Blenheim village. This was not intended to succeed, but to draw in French reserves. Once the enemy's flanks were committed, Marlborough would strike the weakened center with massed cavalry, supported by infantry and artillery in combined arms coordination. It was a plan of extraordinary ambition, requiring perfect timing across a 4-mile front, flawless communication between independently operating wings, and absolute trust between Marlborough and Eugene. If Eugene's attack faltered, Marlborough's center would be exposed to devastating flank fire. If Cutts withdrew too soon, the French could redeploy from Blenheim. If the cavalry charged prematurely, before French reserves were fully committed, they would be massacred. At 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the Allied guns opened fire. Lord Cutts led his redcoats forward against Blenheim village. They advanced in perfect order across the open ground, colors flying, drums beating. French artillery tore gaps in the ranks. The Nebel crossing was chaotic men stumbling in marsh water, reforming under fire on the far bank. The British infantry stormed forward, muskets blazing. They were met with withering volleys. French infantry packed into Blenheim's houses and gardens, delivered disciplined fire by ranks. Cutts' first assault recoiled bloodily. He reformed and attacked again. Again the French held. A third assault. This time Marlborough himself rode over and ordered Cutts to desist. The objective had been achieved. 27 French battalions, the cream of Louis XIV's infantry, were now immobilized in Blenheim village, fixated on defense, unavailable for maneuver elsewhere. On the Allied right, Eugene's assault on Lutzingen was encountering similarly fierce resistance. Bavarian troops contested every yard. Eugene's forces could not break through, but they held the enemy in place. The Franco-Bavarian army, focused on its threatened flanks, paid insufficient attention to its center. Marlborough saw the opportunity. Between Blenheim and Oberglau, the French line was thinning as commanders drew troops to reinforce the threatened sectors. The Duke ordered his engineers forward. Under artillery fire, they constructed fascine bridges across the Nebel. Behind them, Allied infantry formed up in the stubble fields on the far bank, their flanks covered by cavalry. Marshal Tallard, observing from the heights, recognized the danger too late. He ordered his cavalry forward to crush the Allied bridgehead before it could consolidate. French horsemen in gleaming cuirasses thundered downhill. Marlborough had anticipated this precisely. He had positioned infantry in squares to provide fire support for his cavalry. As the French horse charged, Allied infantry delivered massed volleys at close range, staggering the charge. British cavalry, commanded by General Lumley, countercharged whilst the French were still reforming. The collision was devastating. For 2 hours, the cavalry battle raged in the center. Squadrons charged and countercharged across the narrow valley. Men fought with swords and pistols at arm's length. The dust was so thick that officers could barely distinguish friend from enemy. But Marlborough's combined arms doctrine, cavalry, working in coordination with infantry squares and mobile artillery, gave the Allies an edge. French cavalry, operating in the traditional manner as independent arm, lacked the support to sustain their attacks. At 5 o'clock, Marlborough judged the moment had arrived. He personally led 80 squadrons forward in a final, crushing charge. The French center, already wavering, collapsed. Tallard himself, attempting to rally his troops, was captured by Hessian cavalry and brought before Marlborough. The French commander, stunned, could barely speak. "I am very sorry," Marlborough said quietly, "that such a catastrophe should have fallen upon a soldier for whom I have the highest regard." The catastrophe was total. With their center shattered, the Franco-Bavarian army disintegrated. On the Allied left, French infantry trapped in Blenheim village, their lines of retreat cut, found themselves surrounded. Marshal de Clermont, commanding in Blenheim, attempted to escape by plunging into the Danube with his cavalry. He drowned, along with hundreds of his men. The remaining French infantry, some 12,000 soldiers, surrendered en masse. It was the largest capitulation of French forces in living memory. As darkness fell, the scale of the victory became clear. The Franco-Bavarian army had suffered at least 20,000 casualties and 14,000 captured. 56 French colors and 128 guns fell into Allied hands. Marshal Tallard, the elector of Bavaria's chief ministers, and numerous senior officers were prisoners. Allied casualties totaled 12,000, but unlike the French, they had won. The road to Vienna was secure. The Grand Alliance was saved. The myth of French invincibility lay shattered in the Bavarian dust. That night, Marlborough wrote to Sarah on the back of a tavern bill, the only paper, to hand. "I have not time to say more, but to beg you will give my duty to the Queen, and let her know her army has had a glorious victory." It was, characteristically, an understatement. Blenheim was not merely a victory, it was a revolution in warfare. The immediate consequences of Blenheim were profound. Louis XIV, receiving news of the disaster, initially refused to believe it. The French army had not suffered such a defeat in 60 years. When confirmation arrived, the French court fell into shocked silence. In London, the nation erupted in celebration. Queen Anne, overcome with gratitude, gifted Marlborough the royal manor at Woodstock and £240,000 to construct a Blenheim Palace as permanent memorial to his victory. Parliament voted its thanks. Cities across England staged elaborate festivities. John Churchill, the son of impoverished gentry, was now the most celebrated general in Europe. Strategically, Blenheim broke the deadlock of the War of the Spanish Succession. Bavaria was knocked out of the conflict. French forces evacuated southern Germany. Vienna was secure. The Grand Alliance, which had been on the verge of collapse in the spring, was now prosecuting the war with renewed vigor. Before the year ended, Marlborough had captured Landau and Trarbach, rolling back French territorial gains. But it was the tactical and operational lessons of Blenheim that truly mattered. Marlborough had demonstrated that the defensive-minded warfare of the late 17th century could be overcome through coordinated offensive action. His use of strategic deception, the march to the Danube, showed that armies could move faster and further than opponents expected, achieving operational surprise, even in an age of limited intelligence. His combined arms tactics, infantry, cavalry, and artillery working in mutual support, proved devastatingly effective against forces that fought with traditional arm-by-arm coordination. Most importantly, Blenheim demonstrated that decisive victory was possible. For a generation, European warfare had devolved into attritional sieges and inconclusive maneuvers. Marlborough proved that a battle of annihilation, if properly executed, could shatter enemy power and achieve strategic results that years of cautious campaigning could not. Military professionals recognized the significance immediately. Marlborough's subsequent victories, Ramillies in 1706, Oudenarde in 1708, Malplaquet in 1709, confirmed he was not lucky but brilliant. The Prussian military theorist Karl von Clausewitz, writing a century later, called Marlborough a master of position warfare, whilst praising his ability to combine strategic maneuver with tactical aggression. The Duke of Wellington, asked to name history's greatest general, replied, "Napoleon," and in the next breath, Marlborough. Yet by 1711, political fortune had turned against the Duke. Sarah Churchill, never noted for tact, had quarreled irreconcilably with Queen Anne. Without his wife's influence at court, Marlborough lost political protection. The Tory party, now ascendant and favoring peace with France, needed to discredit the Far War's architect. Charges of embezzlement were brought largely spurious, though Marlborough had certainly profited from his position. At the end of 1711, Queen Anne dismissed him from all offices. The greatest general of the age was disgraced. Marlborough and Sarah went into a self-imposed exile on the continent, bitter and humiliated. Only with Queen Anne's death in 1714 and the Hanoverian succession did their fortunes revive. George I restored Marlborough to his position as Captain General, but the Duke's health was failing. He had suffered strokes in 1716 and could no longer ride or command. He lived his final years at Blenheim Palace, still incomplete, its construction plagued by the same political intrigues that had destroyed his career. On the 16th of June, 1722, following another stroke, John Churchill died at Windsor Lodge, aged 72. He was buried initially at Westminster Abbey, but his body was later moved to Blenheim Palace Chapel, where it remains. The paradox is this: Marlborough never lost a battle. He besieged no fortress that he did not take. His campaigns saved Europe from French hegemony, preserved the balance of power, and established Britain as a major continental military force. His tactical innovations combined arms coordination, strategic mobility, decisive offensive action, shaped European warfare for a century. Sandhurst still teaches Blenheim as a model of Christ, operational art. Yet today, Marlborough is largely forgotten. Wellington and Nelson dominate British military memory. Marlborough's very success may explain his obscurity. He fought continental battles far from British shores, against enemies whose threat seems remote to modern audiences. Wellington defeated Napoleon, whose legend transcends military history. Nelson saved Britain from invasion. Their victories had simple, mythic narratives. Marlborough's achievement was subtler, more strategic. He prevented what might have been, rather than defeating what was. His battles lacked the dramatic last-stand quality of Waterloo or Trafalgar. His personality, reserved, calculating, politically adept, did not lend itself to hero worship, and his later disgrace, though subsequently reversed, tainted his reputation in ways that Nelson's scandals and Wellington's political failures never did. Modern military historians have begun to reassess Marlborough's legacy. David Chandler's magisterial biography restored the Duke to his rightful place amongst history's great captains. The Royal Military Academy at Sandhurst includes Blenheim in its core curriculum on operational art. Staff College still studies Marlborough's march to the Danube as an exemplar of strategic deception. But outside specialist circles, the first Duke of Marlborough remains obscure, the forgotten architect of victories that saved a civilization. Blenheim Palace stands today as one of England's grandest country houses, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, visited by thousands annually. Most come to see where Winston Churchill was born in 1874, unaware that the palace commemorates a battle fought 170 years earlier by his illustrious ancestor. In the chapel, a monument erected by Sarah, Duchess of Marlborough, records her husband's achievements in fulsome Latin. She outlived him by 22 years, dying in 1744, still fiercely protective of his reputation. Her will funded the monument's maintenance in perpetuity, determined that posterity should remember what her generation had tried to forget. Walk the fields near the German village of Blenheim today, and you'll find little to mark where 56,000 Frenchmen once stood in apparently invincible array. A small monument commemorates the battle, visited mainly by military history enthusiasts and the occasional British tourist following Churchill heritage trails. The Danube flows on, indifferent. Yet the consequences of that August day in 1704 echo still. The battle established Britain as a major European power, no longer the isolated island kingdom of the 17th century. It demonstrated that Louis XIV's France was not invincible, could not dominate Europe indefinitely. that the balance of power, that peculiarly British strategic concept, could be preserved through military force, applied decisively at the critical point. Marlborough's operational method, strategic deception, rapid maneuver, combined arms combat, decisive battle, became the template for British military success in the 18th century. Wolfe at Quebec, Clive at Plassey, Wellington in the Peninsula all followed principles Marlborough pioneered at Blenheim. The British Army's reputation for tactical excellence and operational audacity, though often undeserved in practice, had its origins in Marlborough's campaigns. But perhaps most importantly, Blenheim stands as testament to what forgotten heroes tell us about how we remember history. Nations construct mythologies around their military past, elevating some figures whilst obscuring others. Wellington defeated Napoleon. Therefore, Wellington endures. Nelson died at Trafalgar. Therefore, Nelson transcends. Marlborough saved Europe from Bourbon domination. Therefore, Marlborough is commemorated by a palace most visitors associate with a different Churchill. The historian must ask why. Is it that 18th century wars seem remote, their stakes less immediately comprehensible than Napoleonic imperialism or Nazi aggression? Is to it that Marlborough's disgrace, though temporary, damaged his posthumous reputation irreparably? Or is it simply that military memory is selective, preserving the dramatic whilst forgetting the strategic, honoring glorious defeats whilst overlooking clinical victories? Military professionals understand. At Sandhurst, officer cadets still study the march to the Danube and the Battle of Blenheim as masterclasses in operational art. At the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College, Marlborough's campaigns feature prominently in teaching strategic deception and combined arms coordination. Amongst those who understand the art of war, Marlborough's reputation remains untarnished. But for the broader British public, for the nation that Marlborough served so brilliantly and whose interests he advanced so decisively, the first Duke remains forgotten, the architect of victories no one remembers, the general who never lost yet somehow lost to history. On the 13th of August each year, as summer wanes and autumn approaches, it is worth remembering the moment when 52,000 Allied soldiers crossed a marshy stream in Bavaria to face an enemy that outnumbered and outpositioned them. Worth remembering the general who chose to fight when prudence dictated retreat. Worth remembering the victory that was so complete, so perfectly executed, that military theorists 3 centuries hence still call it the perfect battle. And worth asking to ourselves, why such achievement, such brilliance, such service to the national interest has been so comprehensively forgotten? Perhaps, in remembering Marlborough, we remember something essential about how nations honor their protectors, and how easily excellence, if not continually celebrated, slips into obscurity. The paradox of Blenheim is that its very perfection made it seem inevitable, almost easy. What Marlborough achieved through genius, his successors could mistake for luck. But on that August morning in 1704, nothing was inevitable. Vienna might have fallen. The Grand Alliance might have collapsed. Louis XIV might have dominated Europe. British military power might have remained marginal, its army dismissed as second-rate. John Churchill, 1st Duke of Marlborough, made a different outcome possible. He marched 250 miles to save an empire. He fought the perfect battle. He changed history. We should remember.